Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey through the shadows of history. Imagine yourself gazing upward into the vast darkness of a medieval night, where the absence of electric light reveals a tapestry of stars more brilliant than anything we witness today. In this ancient darkness, when a mysterious visitor appears trailing fire across the heavens, your heart would quicken with fear rather than wonder, for in those distant centuries, every celestial stranger was interpreted as divine judgment. Every streak of light, a harbinger of plague, famine, or war. The medieval world was one where the boundary between the earthly and divine was consumed thin, where every natural phenomenon carried supernatural weight, and where the night sky served as both clock and oracle for a civilization seeking answers in the stars. If you want to help me too, keep doing these videos. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the like button. It motivates and helps me keep bringing videos in this format. If you'd like to hear about a specific topic, leave a comment below and I'll show you in the video when your topic is chosen. Picture yourself awakening before dawn in a small village nestled between rolling hills, somewhere in the heart of medieval Europe. The year might be 1066 or perhaps 1456, for time moves slowly in these rural communities where generations have worked the same soil with the same tools, following rhythms as ancient as the seasons themselves. You are a peasant, bound to the land by law and custom, your entire world contained within a few miles of thatched cottages, muddy lanes, and endless fields that stretch toward the horizon. Your day begins not with the mechanical precision of an alarm clock, but with the gentle stirring of animals in their pens and the gradual lightening of the eastern sky. You rise from your straw mattress, joints stiff from yesterday's labor, and step outside into air that carries the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the subtle promise of rain. Above you, the vast dome of heaven spreads in all its glory, unmarred by the artificial glow that would one day steal the stars from future generations. In this world, the sky is not merely a backdrop to your existence, but an active participant in the drama of daily life. You have learned to read its moods as carefully as a hunter reads tracks, for your survival depends upon understanding the messages written across that celestial canvas. The position of stars tells you when to plant and when to harvest. The color of the sunset predicts tomorrow's weather. The phase of the moon determines when to slaughter animals for the best preservation of meat. But on this particular morning, something is different. As you tend to your animals, feeding the scraggly chickens that peck at the dirt around your cottage, you notice other villagers emerging from their homes with unusual haste. There is a tension in the air, a collective unease that spreads from house to house like ripples across still water. Old Margot, whose weathered face has seen more winters than anyone can count, stands in her doorway, pointing toward the horizon with a trembling finger. You follow her gaze and feel your heart skip with a mixture of awe and terror. There, suspended against the pale pre-dawn sky like a sword of fire, hangs a sight that will be burned into your memory forever. A comet, its tail streaming behind it like the banner of some cosmic army, dominates the eastern horizon. Even as the sun begins its ascent, this celestial visitor remains visible, defying the natural order that says stars should fade with daylight. The sight sends a chill through your bones that has nothing to do with the morning air. You have heard the stories, passed down through countless generations around winter fires, of what such appearances mean. Your grandmother once told you of the great comet that appeared before the terrible plague swept through the neighboring villages, leaving entire families buried in mass graves. Your father spoke in whispered tones of the fiery star that preceded the invasion of foreign soldiers who burned the abbey and scattered the monks like leaves before a storm. As the morning progresses and news of the comet spreads, the entire rhythm of village life begins to shift. Work that seemed urgent yesterday now feels pointless in the face of impending doom. The blacksmith, usually bent over his forge, before the sun clears the trees, stands idle in his doorway, hammer forgotten in his hand as he stares at the sky. The miller's wheel sits silent, though grain awaits grinding, because what is the point of making flour if the end of the world approaches? You find yourself drawn to the village church, a modest stone building that represents the only connection your community has to the wider world beyond these hills. Father Benedict, the parish priest whose Latin education makes him seem almost magical to your unlettered eyes, has already begun ringing the bell that normally calls the faithful to morning prayers. But today, the bronze voice carries an urgency that makes your stomach tighten with anxiety. Inside the dim sanctuary, lit only by flickering candles and a colored light filtering through small windows, you join your neighbors in prayer. The familiar Latin words wash over you like water, their meaning less important than their comforting rhythm. But even Father Benedict's usually steady voice wavers as he leads the congregation through desperate pleas for divine mercy. You notice how his eyes frequently dart toward the windows, as if expecting to see angels descending or demons arriving to herald the final judgment. The comet's appearance transforms even the most mundane activities into exercises in existential dread. When you return to your cottage to tend your small garden, every withered plant seems like a sign of coming famine. The eggs your hens laid yesterday now appear to be smaller than usual, surely evidence that the cosmic disturbance is already affecting the natural world. Even the milk from your cow tastes different, though you cannot quite identify how it has changed throughout the day. Visitors arrive from neighboring villages, all bearing similar tales of terror and confusion. A merchant traveling the old Roman road reports that the comet can be seen for miles in every direction, visible even in broad daylight, like some impossible second sun. A group of pilgrims, their journey to a distant shrine now seeming either more urgent or utterly pointless, stop to share bread and stories of other signs they have witnessed along there route as evening approaches and you sit beside your fire, sharing a simple meal of bread and ale with your family. The conversation inevitably turns to what the comet might mean. Your wife, practical as always, wonders aloud if you should slaughter the pig earlier than planned. Before whatever catastrophe approaches makes such preparations meaningless. Your children, too young to fully understand the implications, but old enough to sense the adult anxiety surrounding them, ask questions you cannot answer. The night deepens, and still the comet burns in the sky, now even more brilliant against the black canvas of darkness. You lie on your straw mattress, listening to the familiar sounds of your world. The rustling of small animals in the thatch above, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the bare branches of winter trees. But sleep comes fitfully, if at all, in the darkness. Your mind wanders through all the possibilities that tomorrow might bring. Perhaps armies will march across these peaceful fields, trampling the crops you planted with such hope in the spring. Perhaps disease will arrive like an invisible storm, striking down young and old without mercy or reason. Perhaps the earth itself will rebel against the natural order, bringing earthquakes, floods, or fires that will erase your small community from existence as completely as if it had never been. Yet, even in your fear, there is a strange comfort in knowing that you are not alone in this cosmic drama. Every village across Europe, every city and town, every palace and monastery, all look up at the same fiery visitor and wonder what messages it carries from the realm beyond the stars. In this moment of terror, you are connected to all humanity by the same sense of smallness beneath the vast indifference of the heavens. As dawn breaks over your village for the second day since the comet's appearance, imagine now that we drift away from your peasant cottage and travel along winding roads toward a distant monastery, where stone walls rise like cliffs from the surrounding countryside. Here, in scriptoriums lit by tall windows and warmed by braziers, learned men bend over parchments covered in careful Latin script, their world one of books and contemplation rather than soil and sweat. Brother Thomas sits at his wooden desk, a piece of vellum spread before him, his quill poised above an inkwell as he struggles to find words that might explain the inexplicable. Around him, the monastery hums with its usual rhythms, the soft chanting of prayers echoing from the chapel, the scratch of other quills across parchment, the gentle shuffle of sandaled feet on stone floors. But today, even these learned men, these keepers of knowledge and interpreters of divine will, find themselves as bewildered as the simplest peasant. Brother Thomas has spent his adult life copying the works of ancient authorities, preserving the wisdom of Aristotle and Ptolemy, studying the careful calculations that predict the movements of planets and the changing of seasons. His shelves contain treatises on astronomy that speak of celestial spheres and divine mathematics, works that suggest the heavens operate according to God's perfect plan, predictable and orderly as clockwork. Yet this comet defies every pattern he has learned to recognize. The monastery's library, one of the finest collections of manuscripts for hundreds of miles, contains conflicting accounts of what comets might signify. Seneca, that Roman philosopher whose works survived the fall of empires, suggests that comets are natural phenomena, no more supernatural than rain or wind. But Augustine, whose theological authority shapes every aspect of monastic life, warns that such appearances are signs from God, warnings that demand immediate attention and repentance. As Brother Thomas consults one manuscript after another, spreading scrolls and bound volumes across his desk like a general planning a campaign, he discovers that even the greatest minds of antiquity disagreed about these celestial visitors. Aristotle believed comets were atmospheric phenomena, hot, dry exhalations from the earth that caught fire in the upper air. Ptolemy suggested they were stars that appeared only occasionally, following paths too subtle for human calculation. Still other authorities claimed they were divine messengers, angels trailing fire across the heavens to announce the birth or death of kings. The weight of this scholarly confusion presses down upon Brother Thomas like a physical burden. As one of the few literate men in the region, villagers have already begun arriving at the monastery gates, seeking explanations that he cannot provide. Yesterday, a delegation of local nobles rode up the hill, their horses' hooves clattering on the cobblestone courtyard, demanding to know what the comet foretold for their lands and their fortunes. Their eyes held the same fear he had seen in the faces of peasants, proving that education and noble birth provide no protection against the terror of the unknown. Through the tall windows of the scriptorium, Brother Thomas can see the comet even in daylight, a pale streak against the blue sky that seems to mock all human attempts at understanding. He has tried to measure its position against the known constellations to track its movement from night to night, hoping that careful observation might reveal some pattern that would make sense of its appearance. But the comet follows no path described in any of his texts, moves according to no schedule recorded by ancient astronomers. The abbot, a man whose wisdom and learning have guided the monastery through decades of political upheaval and natural disaster, summoned all the brothers to a special meeting in the chapter house as evening prayers concluded. The circular chamber, with its vaulted ceiling and carved stone pillars, seemed to amplify both their voices and their uncertainties as they debated what counsel they should offer to the frightened communities that looked to them for guidance. Brother Marcus, the monastery's most accomplished astronomer, had spent the previous night on the tower, using an astrolabe and other instruments to make careful observations of the comet's position and movement. His measurements, precise as human skill could make them, revealed that this visitor moved differently from any celestial body described in the ancient texts. It was neither planet nor star, neither atmospheric phenomenon nor optical illusion, but something entirely outside the established categories of natural philosophy. The debate that followed stretched long into the night, voices echoing off stone walls as learned men struggled to reconcile their scholarship with the evidence of their own eyes. Some argued that the comet must be a natural phenomenon, explainable by principles they simply did not yet understand, and that spreading fear among the population would serve no godly purpose. Others insisted that dismissing such an obvious divine sign would be both foolish and potentially blasphemous, that their duty as men of God required them to warn the faithful of coming judgment. Brother Thomas found himself caught between these positions, his training in natural philosophy warring with his religious convictions. The ancient texts he had spent years studying suddenly seemed inadequate, as their confident assertions about the orderly nature of the heavens undermined by this single, inexplicable apparition. How could Aristotle's careful categories account for something that appeared to be neither earth nor air, neither fire nor water, but some impossible combination of all elements? Brother Thomas noticed how the comet's appearance had disrupted even the most routine aspects of monastic life. During the canonical hours, when the community gathered for prayer, he could see other brothers glancing toward the windows, their attention divided between the familiar Latin psalms and the unprecedented sight burning in the sky. The usual scholarly discussions that accompanied meals had been replaced by anxious speculation about what the comet might mean for the monastery's future, for the stability of the kingdom, for the fate of Christendom itself. The monastery's scriptorium, normally a place of quiet concentration where the brothers copied texts and illuminated manuscripts, had become a research center dedicated to understanding the comet. Every available text that mentioned celestial phenomena had been retrieved from the library shelves, creating piles of parchment and vellum that threatened to overwhelm the careful organization that usually governed their scholarly work. Brothers who normally specialized in copying religious texts found themselves struggling with astronomical diagrams and mathematical calculations that lay far outside their usual expertise. Perhaps most troubling of all was the realization that their learning, however extensive, provided no clear guidance for action. Unlike a drought, which called for prayers for rain, or a plague, which demanded organized care for the sick, the comet presented no obvious response. Should they intensify their prayers, fast more rigorously, distribute alms more generously, or simply wait to see what consequences might follow? The ancient authorities they revered had left them no clear instructions for dealing with such unprecedented circumstances, as Brother Thomas worked late into the night, copying passages from various texts that might shed light on the comet's meaning. He began to understand that this celestial visitor represented more than just an astronomical curiosity. It was a challenge to the entire framework of knowledge and authority that had guided medieval scholarship for centuries. A reminder that human understanding, however carefully constructed, remained fragile in the face of divine mystery. From the quiet contemplation of the monastery, let us now descend into the bustling streets of a medieval market town, where the comet's appearance has transformed the daily rhythm of commerce and craft into something far more urgent and uncertain. Imagine yourself walking through narrow lanes bordered by timber-framed houses that lean toward each other like conspirators, sharing secrets. Their upper stories nearly touching across the cobblestone streets below. The town of Millbrook, nestled in a river valley where ancient trade routes converge, normally bustles with the organized chaos of medieval commerce. Merchant stalls line the market square, displaying bolts of wool from the surrounding countryside, iron tools forged in local smithies, pottery glazed with techniques passed down through generations, and exotic spices that have traveled from lands so distant they might as well be mythical. But today, 3 days after the comet first appeared, the familiar rhythms of buying and selling have been disrupted by an undercurrent of fear that flows through the streets like an invisible river. Master William, the fuller, stands in the doorway of his workshop, watching apprentices who normally attack their work with energetic enthusiasm now move through their tasks with distracted, mechanical motions. The great wooden vats, where wool is cleaned and thickened, sit half empty, not because there's no work to be done, but because the usual orders from neighboring villages have simply stopped coming. Farmers who would normally bring their raw wool to town have instead remained huddled in their cottages, unwilling to venture far from home while the heavens display such ominous portents. The comet has created a peculiar economic paralysis that spreads through the town like a slow-moving plague. Merchants who might normally extend credit for large purchases now demand immediate payment, uncertain whether their debtors will survive whatever catastrophe the celestial visitor foretells. Customers, meanwhile, hoard their silver coins and carefully consider every transaction, weighing immediate needs against the possibility that they might soon need every resource for mere survival. In the baker's shop, Master Edmund needs tomorrow's bread with hands that shake slightly as he glances through the small window toward the sky. His usual jovial banter with customers has been replaced by hushed conversations about what the comet might mean for the town's future. Old goodwife Martha, who has bought her daily loaf from this same shop for 30 years, whispers stories of other strange appearances in the sky that preceded terrible harvests, invasions by foreign armies, or outbreaks of disease that left entire neighborhoods empty and silent. The town's craftsmen find their work affected in ways both subtle and profound. The carpenter, Master Robert, discovers that his customers now request coffins and funeral preparations far more frequently than the tables, chairs, and storage chests that normally constitute his trade. The apothecary notices an increased demand for herbs and remedies that are believed to ward off evil influences, while his usual stock of medicines for common ailments sits largely untouched. People seem more concerned with protecting themselves from supernatural threats than addressing ordinary human frailties. Even the children, who normally fill the streets with their games and laughter, have been affected by the adults' anxiety. They gather in small groups to stare at the sky, inventing elaborate stories about what the comet might be and where it comes from. Some claim it is the sword of the Archangel Michael, drawn in preparation for the final battle between good and evil. Others suggest it is a dragon flying across the heavens, its fiery breath creating the tale that streams behind it. Their innocent interpretations somehow make the adults' fears seem even more real and immediate. The town's church, dedicated to St. Bartholomew and built from local stone that has weathered centuries of wind and rain, has become the focal point for the community's desperate search for meaning and reassurance. Father Gregory, a man whose practical wisdom has guided the townspeople through famines, floods, and political upheavals, now faces questions that his theological training never prepared him to answer. His sermons, normally focused on the practical virtues of hard work, honest dealing, and charitable behavior, have been transformed into urgent calls for repentance and prayer. The market square, usually filled with the cheerful chaos of buying and selling, has taken on the atmosphere of a perpetual wake. Vendors speak in hushed tones, if afraid that raising their voices might attract the attention of whatever malevolent forces the comet represents. The normal haggling over prices has been replaced by quick, nervous transactions, as if prolonged negotiations might somehow invite disaster. Even the traveling performers and musicians who usually provide entertainment for market days have either left town or sit silent in taverns, their usual repertoire of songs and stories suddenly seeming inappropriate for such ominous times. The towns and the Prancing Pony normally serves as a gathering place where news from the outside world mingles with local gossip over tankards of ale and bowls of hearty stew. But now the common room buzzes with increasingly wild rumors about the comet's significance. A traveling merchant claims to have heard that the comet has been seen as far south as Rome, where the Pope himself has called for special prayers and fasting. A pilgrim returning from a distant shrine reports that other towns have been struck by mysterious plagues or visited by armies of brigands, all coinciding with the comet's appearance. Master Geoffrey, the town's most prosperous wool merchant, finds his usual network of commercial relationships strained by the universal anxiety. Suppliers who would normally deliver goods on agreed schedules now send messages postponing shipments, claiming that the roads are too dangerous to travel while such evil omens fill the sky. His customers, meanwhile, cancel orders or request to renegotiate terms, unwilling to commit to future payments when the future itself seems so uncertain. The guild meetings, where the town's craftsmen and merchants normally discuss practical matters of trade regulation and quality standards, have been transformed into strategy sessions focused on survival. The members debate whether they should pool their resources to purchase additional food supplies, whether they should organize armed patrols to protect against bandits who might take advantage of the general chaos, or whether they should simply hope and pray that whatever the comet foretells will pass over their community without causing harm. The town's physical appearance has begun to reflect the psychological impact of the comet's presence. Houses that are normally kept in good repair now show signs of neglect as their owners focus on what seemed like more pressing concerns. Gardens that would usually be carefully tended for winter vegetables have been abandoned, their owners apparently convinced that normal agricultural planning has become pointless. Even the streets themselves seem different, with fewer people venturing out for casual visits or unnecessary errands. Women who would normally gather at the town well for daily gossip and social connection now hurry through their water-gathering tasks, exchanging only brief, anxious words about their family's welfare and their fears for the future. The communal activities that usually bind the town together, the seasonal festivals, the craft demonstrations, the informal gatherings that make urban life more than mere survival, have all been suspended pending whatever resolution the comet's message might bring. Comet has also revealed the underlying tensions and social divisions that usually remain hidden beneath the surface of daily commerce. Wealthy merchants and successful craftsmen find themselves viewed with suspicion by their poorer neighbors, as if their prosperity might somehow have attracted divine punishment upon the entire community. Religious minorities, the handful of Jews who manage certain financial transactions that Christian law forbids to others, face increased hostility from townspeople looking for someone to blame for their cosmic predicament. Even the town's relationship with the surrounding countryside has been altered by the comet's appearance. Farmers who would normally bring their produce to market now hoard their harvests, uncertain whether they should prepare for famine or invasion. The delicate balance of interdependence between urban crafts and rural agriculture, which normally ensures that both communities prosper, has been disrupted by fear and uncertainty that affects every transaction, every relationship, every plan for the future. As evening approaches and the comet becomes even more visible against the darkening sky, the townspeople retreat to their homes earlier than usual, barricading their doors and shutters as if physical barriers might provide protection against supernatural threats. The streets that would normally remain busy well into the night with the activities of taverns, workshops, and social gatherings now fall silent soon after sunset, leaving only the comet and the stars to witness the town's frightened slumber in this atmosphere of pervasive anxiety. Even the most mundane activities take on apocalyptic significance. A customer's failure to pay a debt on time becomes evidence of impending economic collapse. A child's fever is interpreted as the first sign of divine punishment. A broken cartwheel or a spoiled batch of ale are seen not as ordinary misfortunes, but as symptoms of a cosmic order that has been fundamentally disturbed. The comet has transformed Millbrook from a confident commercial center into a community of fearful individuals, each wondering whether tomorrow will bring the catastrophe that the burning sky seems to promise. In their terror, they have lost sight of the very qualities that made their town prosperous and secure: cooperation, trust, and the willingness to plan for a future that suddenly seems terrifyingly uncertain. Let us now shift our gaze from the immediate terror of common folk to a figure who stands at the intersection of scholarship and history. a man whose duty it is to record the events of his time for generations, yet unborn. Brother Anselm sits in his scriptorium high in the tower of Canterbury Cathedral, his weathered hands moving carefully across parchment as he attempts to document the most extraordinary celestial event he has witnessed in his 40 years of faithful chronicle keeping. The weight of his responsibility presses upon him like a physical burden as he contemplates how to describe something that defies every category of normal experience. For decades, Brother Anselm has recorded the mundane passage of seasons, the reigns of kings, the outcomes of battles, the ravages of plague and famine, always maintaining the objective tone that befits a chronicler of God's unfolding plan. But now, faced with this blazing visitor that dominates both day and night sky, he finds himself struggling to maintain his scholarly detachment. His chronicle, bound in leather and written on vellum of the finest quality, represents more than mere record-keeping. It is a sacred trust, a conversation with the future, an attempt to preserve the lessons of the present for minds not yet born. Each entry must balance factual accuracy with theological interpretation, must serve both as historical document and as spiritual instruction for readers who may not encounter these pages for centuries to come. The comet first appeared on the feast of Saint Michael. Brother Anselm writes, his careful script flowing across the parchment with practiced ease. But even this simple statement requires careful consideration. Should he describe the comet's appearance in terms of its physical characteristics, its position relative to known constellations, its apparent size and brightness, or should he focus on its spiritual significance, its role as divine messenger, its connection to the sacred calendar that governs Christian life? Outside his window, the cathedral city of Canterbury spreads below like a medieval tapestry, its streets and buildings arranged around a great church that has been the spiritual heart of English Christianity for centuries. From his elevated position, Brother Anselm can observe how the comet's presence has affected every aspect of life in this normally ordered community. Pilgrims who journey here to pray at the shrine of St. Thomas Becket now arrive with faces marked by fear rather than devotion, their spiritual quests transformed into desperate pleas for protection against whatever catastrophe the comet foretells. The cathedral itself has become a refuge for those seeking both physical shelter and spiritual comfort. The great nave, normally filled only during major religious festivals, now accommodates crowds of worshippers who come to pray at all hours of the day and night. Their voices rise in a constant murmur of supplication, creating a sound like distant thunder that echoes off the stone, vaulting and mingles with the scratching of Brother Anselm's quill as he works to capture their anguish in careful Latin prose. Archbishop William, that learned prelate whose political wisdom has guided both church and kingdom through turbulent times, summoned Brother Anselm to a private audience 3 days after the comet's first appearance in the Archbishop's private chamber, surrounded by theological treatises and administrative documents that reflect complex responsibilities of high ecclesiastical office. The two men discussed how the Chronicles should address this unprecedented event. The Archbishop's concerns extend far beyond mere historical accuracy. The Chronicle that Brother Anselm maintains will eventually be copied and attributed to other religious houses throughout Europe, carrying Canterbury's interpretation of events to scholarly communities across Christendom. How they choose to characterize the comet will influence how future generations understand its significance, will shape the theological and historical narrative that explains this cosmic visitation to minds not yet clouded by present fears. Brother Anselm remembers the Archbishop's words with perfect clarity. We must write neither as men paralyzed by superstition nor as scholars who dismiss divine signs. Our chronicle must reflect both the fear this apparition has inspired and the faith that sustains us through all earthly trials. Future readers must understand both what we've witnessed and how we responded to God's mysterious ways. The challenge of maintaining this balance becomes more difficult with each passing day as reports arrive from across the kingdom describing the comet's effects on communities both great and small. Messengers bring accounts of miraculous healings that coincided with the comet's appearance, but also stories of sudden deaths, of cattle refusing to graze, of crops withering in fields despite favorable weather. How can a chronicler separate genuine correlation from mere coincidence, divine intervention from natural consequence? Brother Anselm's research into previous chronicles reveals that comets have appeared throughout history, each generating its own cycle of fear and interpretation. He discovers accounts of the great comet that preceded the Norman conquest, described by earlier chroniclers as a clear warning of the political upheaval that transformed English society. Another comet, recorded in the annals of a German monastery, appeared just before a devastating plague that killed thousands and left entire regions depopulated. These historical precedents both comfort and terrify him. They suggest that comets are part of God's natural order, periodic reminders of divine sovereignty that have appeared throughout human history. But they also document the very real catastrophes that seem to follow these celestial visitations, lending credence to the fears that now grip every community within sight. The blazing apparition. The process of writing his chronicle entry requires Brother Anselm to consult multiple sources, two-way conflicting accounts, to balance eyewitness testimony against theoretical understanding. Letters arrive daily from other monasteries describing local reactions to the comet, each community's response shaped by their particular circumstances and theological perspectives. A abbey near the Scottish border reports that the comet has inspired increased pilgrimages to local shrines, while a priory in the West Country describes how the apparition has coincided with a series of violent storms that have damaged crops and flooded villages. Brother Anselm finds himself torn between his scholarly training, which demands objective analysis of available evidence, and his religious convictions, which interpret the comet is undoubtedly significant in God's plan for humanity. The classical authorities he studied in his youth, men like Pliny and Seneca, offer naturalistic explanations for cometary phenomena that seem almost blasphemous when applied to something so obviously supernatural. Yet Christian theologians provide no consensus about how such apparitions should be interpreted, leaving him to navigate between competing traditions of understanding. Political implications of his chronicle entryway heavily on Brother Anselm's mind as he contemplates how to describe the comet's effects on royal authority and social order. King Edward, that pious monarch whose reign has been marked by relative peace and prosperity, now faces challenges to his authority from nobles who interpret the comet as evidence of divine displeasure with royal policies. Peasant communities that normally accept their social position with resignation now whisper about the possibility that the cosmic disturbance signals an approaching reversal of earthly hierarchies. The comet has also affected the delicate relationships between different religious communities within the kingdom. Jewish scholars, whose knowledge of astronomy and mathematics often exceeds that of their Christian neighbors, find themselves in the paradoxical position of being both consulted for their sparing and blamed for their supposed role in attracting divine wrath. Their ancient texts contain astronomical observations that might shed light on the comet's nature, but their theological interpretations of celestial events differ fundamentally from Christian doctrine. Brother Anselm must also consider how his chronicle will be received by future readers who may inhabit a world transformed by whatever consequences the comet brings. If the celestial visitor indeed heralds plague, famine, or invasion, his account may serve as a warning to help future generations recognize and prepare for similar threats. But if the fears prove groundless, if life returns to normal without catastrophic consequences, his chronicle must explain how an entire civilization could be so thoroughly terrorized by what might proved to be merely a natural phenomenon. The weight of this responsibility keeps Brother Anselm at his desk long after the evening prayers have concluded, his candle burning low as he searches for words that might adequately capture both the objective facts of the comet's appearance and the subjective experience of living beneath its ominous glow. His chronicle must serve simultaneously as a historical document, theological treatise, and pastoral comfort for readers who may face similar challenges in ages yet to come. As he writes, Brother Anselm becomes increasingly aware that he is documenting not just an astronomical event, but a profound crisis of understanding that has shaken the foundations of medieval certainty. The comet has revealed the limits of human knowledge, the fragility of social order, and the depth of humanity's need for meaning in the face of cosmic mystery. His chronicle must somehow contain all of these themes while maintaining the scholarly objectivity that makes historical writing valuable to future generations. The scratching of his quill against parchment provides a steady rhythm that carries him through the long hours of composition, each carefully formed letter representing his attempt to bridge the gap between present confusion and future understanding. In the silence of his tower chamber, broken only by the distant sounds of a city trying to maintain normal life despite extraordinary circumstances, Brother Anselm continues his sacred work of preserving the present for the judgment of eternity. Now, let us leap forward through the centuries, leaving behind the flickering candles and frightened whispers of medieval England, to find ourselves in a different world entirely. The year is 1705, and we stand in the cramped but orderly study of one Edmund Halley, astronomer, mathematician, and Fellow of the Royal Society of London. The room breathes with the confidence of the Age of Enlightenment, its shelves lined with books that speak of natural laws rather than divine mysteries, its desk covered with calculations that promise to reveal the clockwork mechanisms underlying celestial movements. Dr. Halley, a man of middle years whose keen eyes reflect both intellectual curiosity and unwavering determination, sits surrounded by papers covered with numbers, diagrams, and geometric figures that would have seemed like magical incantations to Brother Anselm centuries before. The comet that terrorized the medieval populations has become, in Halley's methodical hands, a problem to be solved through the application of reason, observation, and mathematical analysis. Yet the intensity with which he pursues his work suggests that this particular celestial visitor has captured his imagination as completely as it once paralyzed entire kingdoms with fear. The transformation is remarkable to contemplate. Where medieval chroniclers saw divine judgment, Halley sees natural law. Where peasants observed omens of catastrophe, he perceives patterns that followed mathematical principles as reliable as the movement of clock gears. Where monks debated theological significance, he calculates orbital mechanics with the precision of an engineer designing a cathedral. The comet remains the same cosmic phenomenon, but the human mind approaching it has been revolutionized by centuries of scientific progress. Halley's study reflects this intellectual revolution in every detail. Instead of religious texts and classical authorities, his shelves contain the works of Newton, whose Principia Mathematica has provided the theoretical framework for understanding gravitational forces that govern celestial mechanics. Rather than seeking guidance from ancient philosophers or medieval theologians, Halley corresponds with fellow scientists across Europe, sharing observations and calculations in a collaborative effort to unlock the secrets of the universe through empirical investigation. Comet that now occupies his attention appeared in the sky during 1682, creating the same spectacular display that had terrified observers for millennia. But Halley approached this apparition with instruments rather than prayers, measuring its position against the stellar background, tracking its movement with mathematical precision, recording its changing brightness with the methodical thoroughness that characterizes the new scientific method. Where earlier observers saw supernatural visitation, He collected data points for analysis. His breakthrough came not from divine revelation or scholarly authority, but from painstaking comparison of historical records with contemporary observations. Halley discovered that ancient chronicles, those same documents that medieval monks had created to record God's mysterious ways, actually contained valuable astronomical data when interpreted through the lens of modern scientific understanding. The fears and superstitions that had once paralyzed entire civilizations now provided him with a database of comet sightings stretching back through centuries of human observation, working by candlelight in his London study, just as Brother Anselm had worked in his Canterbury Tower, but guided by entirely different principles of investigation. Halley began to recognize patterns in the historical record that previous generations had been unable to perceive. Comets that medieval chroniclers had recorded as separate supernatural events began to appear under mathematical analysis as return visits of the same celestial object following a predictable orbital path through the solar system. The comet of 1682, he realized, matched descriptions of similar apparitions recorded in 1607, 1531, 1456, and extending backward through history at intervals of approximately 76 years. What had seemed like random visitations of divine messengers now revealed themselves as the regular orbit of a single comet, as predictable in its movements as the planets themselves, governed by the same gravitational forces that Newton had described with such elegant mathematical precision. This discovery represented more than just an astronomical curiosity. It constituted a fundamental challenge to the worldview that had dominated human thinking for millennia, demonstrating that phenomena once attributed to supernatural intervention could be explained through natural law and predicted through mathematical calculation. The comet that had inspired terror in medieval populations would return again in 1758. Halley confidently predicted, not as a harbinger of doom, but as a testament to the orderly, comprehensible nature of the universe. The implications of this realization excited Halley in ways that went far beyond mere academic satisfaction. He was proposing to predict the future based on mathematical analysis of the past, to demonstrate that human reason could penetrate mysteries that had baffled the greatest minds of previous generations. If his calculations proved correct, if the comet returned as predicted, it would validate not just his specific theory, but the entire scientific method that had made such discoveries possible. Yet Halley's work required him to engage seriously with the very historical records that earlier generations had created under the influence of superstition in religious interpretation. Medieval chronicles, Islamic astronomical texts, Chinese court records, all contained observations of comets that were intermingled with supernatural interpretations and theological speculation. He had to separate factual observation from cultural interpretation, extracting useful astronomical data from documents that had been written primarily to serve religious or political purposes. The process of historical analysis revealed to Halley the remarkable consistency of human observation across cultures and centuries. Despite their different explanations for what they witnessed, astronomers in China, Europe, and the Islamic world had recorded the same celestial phenomena with similar accuracy. The comet's position, brightness, and duration of visibility remained constant, even when the cultural interpretation of its significance varied dramatically between civilizations. Working with Newton's laws of motion and gravitation, Halley was able to calculate not just the comet's past appearances, but also the gravitational influences of planets that would affect its orbital path. This required mathematical techniques of extraordinary sophistication, calculations that pushed the boundaries of contemporary mathematical knowledge and demonstrated the power of theoretical physics to explain and predict natural phenomena. The social and intellectual contexts of Halley's work differed as dramatically. From medieval conditions as his scientific methods differed from theological interpretation. Instead of laboring in isolation within monastic walls, he participated in a vibrant community of natural philosophers who shared information freely, challenged each other's theories constructively, and built upon previous discoveries to advance human understanding. The Royal Society provided an institutional framework for scientific collaboration that had no equivalent in earlier periods. Halley's correspondence with fellow scientists across Europe created a network of information sharing that allowed rapid verification of observations and collaborative refinement of theories. When the comet appeared in 1682, astronomers in Paris, Berlin, Prague, and other major centers simultaneously recorded its movements, providing multiple independent observations that could be compared for accuracy and used to improve orbital calculations. The printing press had revolutionized the dissemination of scientific knowledge, allowing Halley to consult published observations from around the world and to share his own discoveries with unprecedented speed and accuracy. Where medieval monks had spent months copying manuscripts by hand, often introducing errors in the process, printed books could reproduce complex mathematical calculations and astronomical tables with perfect precision, enabling scientific collaboration on a scale impossible in earlier periods. Halley's prediction that the comet would return in 1758 represented an extraordinary act of intellectual courage, a public commitment to the power of scientific reasoning that would be tested by future observation. He was essentially betting his scientific reputation on the accuracy of mathematical principles that, while theoretically sound, had never been applied to such long-term astronomical predictions. If the comet failed to appear as predicted, it would represent a significant setback for the entire scientific worldview he was helping to establish. The comet's regular appearances throughout history had coincided with major historical events purely by coincidence, but medieval observers had interpreted these correlations as evidence of supernatural causation. Halley's work demonstrated that apparent connections between celestial events and earthly disasters were merely the result of statistical probability rather than divine intervention. When comets appeared roughly every 76 years, it was inevitable that some of these appearances would coincide with wars, plagues, famines, or political upheavals that occurred regularly throughout human history. This realization had profound implications extending far beyond astronomy. If comets could be explained through natural law rather than supernatural intervention, what other phenomena that had been attributed to divine action might yield to scientific analysis? Halley's work contributed to a broader intellectual transformation that would eventually subject everything from weather patterns to human behavior to systematic investigation based on empirical observation and mathematical analysis. The psychological transformation required to approach comets scientifically rather than superstitiously represented a fundamental shift in human consciousness. Where earlier generations had responded to celestial phenomena with fear and religious interpretation, Halley cultivated intellectual curiosity and methodical investigation. The same sense of awe that had driven medieval monks to their knees now inspired scientific inquiry that sought to understand rather than merely worship the mechanisms underlying natural phenomena. Yet Halley was not entirely free from the superstitions of his age. Even as he calculated orbital mechanics with mathematical precision, he remained influenced by theological assumptions about the divine design of the universe. His scientific work existed within a cultural context that still viewed natural law as evidence of God's rational plan for creation, even if that plan could be understood through human reason rather than revealed through scriptural authority. The comet that would eventually bear Halley's name had appeared throughout human history as the same physical object, but its meaning for human observers had been completely transformed by the development of scientific thinking. Medieval peasants and Enlightenment astronomers looked at identical celestial phenomena but saw entirely different realities. Their perceptions shaped by the intellectual frameworks available to their respective cultures. The year 1758 arrived with an anticipation unlike any other in human history. For the first time, a significant portion of educated humanity waited not in terror, but in eager expectation for the appearance of a celestial visitor. Edmund Halley had died 16 years earlier, never living to see the vindication of his bold prediction, but his mathematical legacy lived on in the calculations and observations of astronomers across Europe who prepared to witness what would become the most important astronomical event of the 18th century in the Observatory of the Collège Royal in Paris. Astronomer Charles Messier spent the autumn months of 1758 scanning the heavens with methodical precision. His telescope trained on the regions of sky where calculations suggested the comet should first become visible. The irony was not lost on him that he searched for an object that previous generations would have prayed never to see, that what had once been regarded as an harbinger of doom was now eagerly awaited as a triumph of human understanding over superstition. Messier's nightly vigils in the cold observatory dome represented a new kind of dedication to scientific truth, one that required patience, precision, and unwavering faith in mathematical principles rather than divine revelation. Night, he adjusted his instruments, recorded his observations, and compared his findings with the predicted orbital path that Halley's calculations had traced across the star charts. The comet's delayed appearance tested not just Messier's patience, but the credibility of the entire scientific worldview that had promised its return. The delay itself became a source of intense scientific interest and public speculation. Halley's original prediction had placed the comet's return sometime in 1758. But as months passed without any sighting, critics began to question whether the whole enterprise of mathematical astronomy might be fundamentally flawed. Had centuries of superstitious fear been replaced by equally unfounded scientific optimism? Were natural philosophers simply more sophisticated fortune-tellers, their equations and calculations no more reliable than the astrological charts they claimed to have superseded? But the astronomical community understood that orbital mechanics involved complexities that Halley's pioneering calculations could only approximate. The gravitational influence of planets, particularly the massive bodies of Jupiter and Saturn, would inevitably affect the comet's path in ways that required more sophisticated mathematical analysis than had been available to the original predictor. French mathematician Alexis Clairaut undertook the enormous task of calculating these planetary perturbations, working with a team of assistants to perform the thousands of calculations needed to refine Halley's prediction. Clairaut's work represented a new phase in the development of astronomical science, one that required not just individual genius, but collaborative effort and institutional support. The French Academy of Sciences provided resources that allowed multiple mathematicians to work together on different aspects of the orbital calculation, dividing the enormous computational burden in ways that would have been impossible for earlier generations of natural philosophers working in isolation. The mathematical techniques required for these perturbations calculations pushed the boundaries of contemporary analysis, requiring the development of new methods for solving complex differential equations that described the gravitational interactions between multiple celestial bodies moving through space. This work laid the foundation for what would eventually become the field of celestial mechanics, demonstrating that even the most complex astronomical phenomena could be understood through sufficiently sophisticated mathematical analysis. As winter approached in 1758 drew to a close without any confirmed sighting of the predicted comet, the scientific reputation of mathematical astronomy hung in the balance. Public interest in the prediction had spread far beyond professional astronomical circles, creating a test case for the credibility of the entire Enlightenment project of understanding nature through reason rather than accepting it through faith. newspapers and pamphlets across Europe followed the story with an attention usually reserved for wars and political crises. The social implications of Halley's prediction extended far beyond astronomy. If mathematical calculation could successfully predict the return of a comet across a span of 76 years, what other aspects of the natural world might yield to similar analysis? The success or failure of this prediction would influence public confidence in scientific method, affecting everything from medical practice to engineering projects to agricultural planning. Religious authorities found themselves in the peculiar position of hoping that scientific prediction would prove accurate, not because they endorsed materialistic explanations of celestial phenomena, but because the alternative might lead to renewed superstition and fear that would undermine social order. The Catholic Church, which had learned to accommodate Newtonian physics within a framework of divine design, now had a vested interest in the success of mathematical astronomy that promised to eliminate popular terror of cometary appearances down on Christmas night, 1758, as snow fell softly over the rooftops of Paris. Charles Messier made the observation that would transform him from an obscure astronomer into one of the most celebrated scientists of his generation. Through the eyepiece of his telescope in the constellation of Pisces, he detected a faint, fuzzy object that matched the characteristics described in Halley's prediction. The comet had returned, delayed by the gravitational influences that Clairaut's calculations had predicted, but following the orbital path that mathematical analysis had traced through the solar system. The confirmation of Halley's prediction represented more than just a successful astronomical forecast. It demonstrated that human reason could penetrate the deepest mysteries of the universe, that mathematical law governed even the most distant and ancient celestial phenomena, and that the scientific method provided a reliable path to understanding that transcended the limitations of cultural prejudice and religious doctrine. News of the comet's discovery spread across Europe with a speed that reflected the improved communication networks of the 18th century. Within weeks, astronomers in London, Berlin, St. Petersburg, and other major centers had confirmed Messier's observation, tracking the comet as it brightened and developed a spectacular tale that had terrified observers for millennia. But now this cosmic display was greeted with celebration rather than fear, with scientific meetings rather than desperate prayers. The Royal Society of London organized special sessions to discuss the comet's appearance and its implications for astronomical science. Fellows presented papers analyzing the comet's orbital characteristics, its physical composition as revealed by spectroscopic analysis, and the historical record of its previous appearances that could now be understood as part of a regular cycle rather than random supernatural interventions. Universities across Europe incorporated the comet's successful prediction into their curricula as a demonstration of the power of mathematical reasoning. Students who might once have been taught to interpret celestial phenomena through theological frameworks now learn to calculate orbital mechanics and predict future astronomical events based on physical law rather than divine will. The successful prediction of the comet's return established a new relationship between human beings and the cosmos, one based on understanding rather than fear, on prediction rather than passive acceptance of divine mystery. This transformation represented one of the most significant intellectual achievements in human history, demonstrating that phenomena, once considered completely beyond human comprehension, could be subjected to rational analysis and mathematical prediction. The comet that medieval chroniclers had recorded as evidence of God's mysterious ways became, through Halley's work and its subsequent vindication, proof of the universe's rational design and humanity's capacity to understand that design through systematic investigation. The same celestial object that had once driven entire civilizations to despair now inspired confidence in human reason. In observatories across Europe, astronomers continued their careful observations of the 1758 to 1759 apparition, measuring its brightness, tracking its movement, and analyzing its spectrum with instruments that revealed details invisible to earlier generations. Each observation added to the growing body of data that confirmed not just Halley's specific prediction, but the broader scientific worldview that made such predictions possible. The comet's successful return marked a turning point in human consciousness, the moment when celestial phenomena ceased to be primarily sources of terror and became objects of scientific interest. This transformation reflected a fundamental shift in humanity's understanding of its place in the universe, from passive victims of incomprehensible cosmic forces to active investigators capable of understanding and predicting the natural world. As the comet faded from visibility in the spring of 1759, having completed its spectacular vindication of mathematical astronomy, it left behind a transformed intellectual landscape. The success of Halley's prediction had demonstrated that the universe operated according to comprehensible laws that human reason could discover and apply, providing a foundation for the continued development of scientific understanding that would characterize the centuries to follow. The medieval peasant who had trembled beneath the comet's fiery tail in the Enlightenment astronomer who had calculated its orbital return had observed the same celestial phenomenon, but they lived in fundamentally different universes. The difference lay not in the comet itself, but in the intellectual framework through which human beings interpreted their observations, a framework that had been revolutionized by centuries of scientific progress that culminated in this moment of astronomical triumph. Now, let us journey even further back through the corridors of time, beyond the Gothic cathedrals and cobbled streets of medieval Europe, beyond the Roman legions and Greek philosophers, to find ourselves in the cradle of systematic astronomy itself. The year is approximately 750 BCE, and we stand upon the towering ziggurat of Marduk in Babylon, that magnificent city that rises from the Mesopotamian plain like a man-made mountain, crowned with temples and observatories. Here, in this ancient center of learning and power, where the Euphrates River winds its lazy course through fertile fields that have nourished civilization for millennia, we encountered the first systematic observers of comets, men whose careful records would eventually provide the data that allowed Edmund Halley to recognize the periodic nature of his famous comet. These Babylonian astronomer priests represent the earliest attempt to transform fear of transient celestial phenomena into understanding through systematic observation and record keeping. The ziggurat's highest platform serves as both temple and observatory, a sacred space where the boundaries between earth and heaven seem to dissolve in the thin air above the city's sprawling maze of streets, markets, and residential districts. From this elevated position, the astronomer priests can observe the entire dome of the night sky without obstruction, tracking the movements of planets, recording the positions of stars, and noting the appearance of unusual celestial visitors that seem to appear from nowhere and vanish again into the cosmic darkness. Nab-Rim, A-N-N-I, whose name means Nabu is merciful, serves as the chief astronomer of the temple complex, a position that combines religious authority with scientific responsibility in ways that would seem strange to modern observers, but made perfect sense in a culture where the gods were believed to communicate their intentions through celestial signs. His weathered hands, stained with the ink used to inscribe cuneiform characters on clay tablets, move with practiced precision as he records observations that will survive for millennia, outlasting the empire that created them. The appearance of comets in the Babylonian worldview represents something far more complex than the simple terror that would characterize medieval European responses to similar phenomena. These ancient observers had developed sophisticated systems for categorizing celestial events, distinguishing between different types of unusual apparitions and correlating them with specific kinds of earthly consequences. Their approach to comets combined careful empirical observation with elaborate interpretive frameworks that sought to decode divine messages written across the heavens. Tonight, as Nabiri Mani climbs the stone steps that lead to the observation platform, his sandaled feet finding their familiar path despite the darkness, he carries with him the accumulated wisdom of generations of predecessors who have watched these same skies. The tablet tucked beneath his arm contains astronomical observations dating back centuries, records that document the appearance of comets, their duration of visibility, their apparent paths across the constellation patterns, and the earthly events that coincided with their appearances. The comet that now dominates the pre-dawn sky, its tail streaming like a celestial banner across the constellation that the Babylonians called the Hired Man, will be recorded by medieval European chroniclers as a harbinger of doom. But Nabiri Mani approaches it with the methodical calm of a professional observer. His training has taught him to distinguish between different categories of celestial phenomena, to note subtle variations in appearance and behavior that might affect the interpretation of their significance. The Babylonian system of astronomical observation had developed over centuries into a sophisticated enterprise that combined careful empirical work with complex theoretical frameworks. Unlike their medieval successors, who would approach comets primarily through theological interpretation, these ancient astronomers sought to understand celestial phenomena through systematic comparison of observations, looking for patterns that might reveal the underlying logic of divine communication. Na. Uramani's observations begin before dawn, when the sky is dark enough to reveal faint celestial objects, but light enough to allow accurate positioning relative to known star patterns. His instruments, though primitive by modern standards, represent the pinnacle of ancient observational technology. Carefully calibrated sundials for tracking time, sophisticated water clocks for measuring intervals, and angular measurement devices that allow precise determination of celestial positions. The process of observation requires intense concentration and methodical record keeping. Each night, Nabiri Mani notes the comet's position relative to fixed stars, measures its apparent brightness compared to known celestial landmarks, and records any changes in the appearance of its tail or nucleus. These observations are inscribed in cuneiform script on clay tablets that will be fired and preserved in the temple library, creating a permanent record for future reference. But the Babylonian approach to comets extends far beyond mere observation and record keeping. These ancient astronomers had developed elaborate systems for interpreting celestial phenomena in terms of their implications for earthly affairs, systems that required extensive knowledge of historical correlations, seasonal patterns, and the complex relationships between different categories of omens. The appearance of a comet in a particular constellation carries specific meanings that depend on the mythological associations of that star group, the season of its appearance, the phase of the moon, and the positions of the visible planets. A comet appearing in the constellation associated with the god Marduk might have entirely different implications than one appearing in the star pattern connected with Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. The direction of the comet's tail, its color, and its duration of visibility all contribute to the complexity of interpretation. NABU-RIM ANNI consults extensive collections of omen texts that preserve the accumulated wisdom of centuries of astronomical observation. These documents, inscribed on thousands of clay tablets and organized according to sophisticated filing systems, contain detailed catalogs of celestial phenomena and their earthly consequences. The appearance of a comet with specific characteristics has been correlated with particular types of political upheaval, natural disasters, or changes in royal fortune based on careful analysis of historical patterns. The social and political importance of accurate astronomical interpretation cannot be overstated in Babylonian civilization. Kings make decisions about war and peace, about taxation and public works, about religious ceremonies and diplomatic negotiations based on the advice of astronomer priests like Nabiri-Mani. The appearance of a comet might trigger changes in government policy, influence the timing of military campaigns, or determine the selection of favorable dates for important state ceremonies. The astronomical work conducted on the ziggurat represents a collaborative enterprise involving dozens of trained observers, scribes, and interpreters who work together to maintain the complex system of celestial surveillance that protects and guides Babylonian civilization. Junior astronomers are trained in observation techniques, scribal methods, and interpretive principles through years of apprenticeship that combines practical experience with theoretical instruction. The temple complex maintains extensive archives of astronomical observations that stretch back for centuries, creating a database of celestial phenomena that allows for sophisticated pattern recognition and predictive analysis. When a new comet appears, astronomers can compare its characteristics with similar apparitions recorded in previous generations, looking for correlations that might suggest its likely significance and duration. The Babylonian understanding of comets also reflects their broader cosmological worldview, which sees the universe as a carefully ordered system where earthly and celestial realms mirror and influence each other according to divine plan. Comets are not random intrusions into this cosmic order, but rather components of a complex communication system through which the gods conveyed their intentions to human observers capable of reading celestial messages. The process of interpretation requires not just astronomical knowledge, but extensive familiarity with historical patterns, mythological associations, and the complex relationships between different categories of omens. A single comet's appearance might be interpreted in conjunction with unusual weather patterns, animal behavior, the birth of deformed children, or other phenomena that suggest divine displeasure or approval of human activities. The accuracy of astronomical predictions and interpretations directly affects the reputation and social status of the astronomer priests who create them. Successful predictions enhance their authority and influence, while failed interpretations can result in loss of position, exile, or even execution. This system creates powerful incentives for careful observation and conservative interpretation, encouraging astronomers to base their conclusions on extensive evidence rather than speculation. The Babylonian approach to comets also includes sophisticated techniques for determining the optimal timing of responses to celestial omens. The appearance of a comet might require immediate action, such as special prayers or sacrificial ceremonies, or it might call for longer-term preparations, such as military mobilization or changes in agricultural planning. The timing and nature of appropriate responses depend on detailed analysis of the comet's characteristics and their correlation with historical precedents. Nabiri-Mani's nightly observations of the Kago current comet contribute to this vast enterprise of celestial interpretation, adding new data points to the accumulated wisdom of generations while applying established principles to the analysis of contemporary phenomena. His work represents the intersection of empirical science and religious practice, demonstrating how ancient civilizations sought to understand and predict natural phenomena through systematic observation combined with cultural interpretation. The comet that burns in the Babylonian sky will eventually be recognized by future astronomers as the same celestial visitor that terrified medieval Europeans and vindicated Enlightenment mathematics. But for Nabiri-Mani and his colleagues, it represents something different entirely. A divine message that requires careful decoding through the application of ancient wisdom and systematic observation. A cosmic communication that connects the realm of the gods with the world of human affairs. As dawn approaches and the comet fades into the growing daylight, Nabirimani completes his observations and prepares his preliminary report for presentation to the royal court. His analysis will influence decisions that affect thousands of lives, shape policies that determine the empire's future, and contribute to the ongoing human effort to understand the mysterious relationships between celestial phenomena and earthly events. In his careful measurements and thoughtful interpretations, we can recognize the earliest beginnings of the scientific spirit that would eventually transform humanity's relationship with the cosmos. Let us now turn our gaze eastward across the vast expanses of Asia, beyond the deserts and mountain ranges that separate civilizations, to find ourselves in the imperial court of ancient China during the Han Dynasty, approximately 200 BCE, here in the forbidden city of Chang'an, where golden roofs gleam beneath azure skies and countless courtiers move through halls decorated with jade and silk. We encounter another ancient tradition of systematic comet observation that developed independently of Babylonian astronomy, yet shared many of its fundamental concerns with celestial omens and their earthly significance. The Imperial Observatory, a complex of elegant buildings arranged according to precise geometric principles that reflect the cosmic order believed to govern both heaven and earth, serves as the center of Chinese astronomical work. Unlike the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia, these structures harmonize with their natural surroundings, their curved roofs and painted columns, creating spaces that seem to float between earth and sky like bridges connecting the mortal and divine realms. Grand astrologer Lu Xun, whose family has served the imperial court for generations, represents the pinnacle of Chinese astronomical achievement during this golden age of Han civilization. His silk robes, decorated with embroidered dragons and celestial symbols, mark his exalted status within the court hierarchy, while his scholarly demeanor reflects years of intensive study in the classical texts that preserve ancient wisdom about the relationships between heavenly phenomena and earthly governance. The Chinese approach to comets differs significantly from both Babylonian and medieval European interpretations, reflecting a unique cosmological worldview that sees celestial phenomena as direct manifestations of the emperor's moral fitness to rule. The concept of the mandate of heaven suggests that legitimate political authority derives from cosmic approval, and that unusual astronomical events serve as barometers of imperial virtue or warnings of dynastic decline. In this philosophical framework, comets occupy a particularly sensitive position as indicators of potential political instability. Their unpredictable appearances, dramatic visual impact, and tendency to coincide with periods of social upheaval make them powerful symbols of cosmic displeasure with earthly governance. Comets' appearance might signal the need for imperial reform, the approach of dynastic change, the requirement for extraordinary measures to restore harmony between heaven and earth. Lu Xun's observations of the current comet, which appeared in the constellation known as the Azure Dragon of the East, require careful integration of astronomical data with political analysis. The comet's position, brightness, color, and duration of visibility must be interpreted not just as physical phenomena, but as cosmic communications about the state of imperial governance and the emperor's relationship with the divine forces that legitimize political authority. The Chinese astronomical tradition had developed sophisticated observational techniques and record-keeping systems that rivaled and in some cases exceeded those of their Babylonian contemporaries. The imperial bureaucracy maintained detailed archives of celestial observations stretching back for centuries, creating comprehensive databases that allow for pattern recognition and comparative analysis of unusual phenomena. The grand astrologer's daily routine begins before dawn, when he joins his assistants on the observatory's main platform to conduct systematic observations of planetary positions, stellar configurations, and any unusual celestial appearances. The current comet, visible now for 3 weeks, has been carefully tracked as it moves across the sky, its changing position recorded with precision instruments that represent the pinnacle of ancient Chinese technology. The process of observation requires not only technical skill, but also deep familiarity with the complex symbolic systems that govern Chinese astronomical interpretation. Each constellation carries specific mythological associations, seasonal meanings, political implications that affect how phenomena appearing within its boundaries should be understood. The azure dragon of the East, for example, is associated with spring, growth, imperial authority, and the eastern provinces of the empire. Liu Xin's preliminary analysis of the comet suggests several possible interpretations, each with different implications for imperial policy and court politics. The comet's bright appearance and prominent tail might indicate impending military victories, successful harvests, or the birth of future sages who will strengthen the dynasty. Alternatively, its sudden appearance and unusual color could warn of natural disasters, foreign invasions, or internal rebellions that threaten imperial stability. The complexity of Chinese commentary interpretation reflects the sophisticated philosophical framework within which these observations are conducted. Confucian political theory, Taoist natural philosophy, and indigenous Chinese cosmological concepts combine to create interpretive systems that see comets as components of a vast, interconnected web of relationships between cosmic forces and human affairs. The comet's appearance has already generated intense discussion among court officials, scholars, and military commanders who seek guidance about its implications for their respective responsibilities. The Minister of War wants to know whether the comet signals favorable conditions for a planned campaign against northern barbarians. The Minister of Agriculture inquires whether celestial conditions suggest modifications to this year's planting schedule. The Emperor himself has requested a comprehensive analysis of the comet's significance for the dynasty's future prospects. Liu Xin's response to these requests requires careful balance between astronomical observation and political prudence. His interpretations must be scientifically defensible, based on available evidence and historical precedents. Yet, they must also be politically acceptable to powerful courtiers whose careers might be affected by his conclusions. The tension between objective analysis and political necessity creates challenges that every court astronomer must navigate with skill and discretion. The Chinese astronomical tradition includes sophisticated theoretical frameworks for understanding cometary phenomena that differ markedly from Western approaches. Rather than seeing comets as either supernatural interventions or mechanical celestial bodies, Chinese astronomers conceptualize them as manifestations of qi, the fundamental energy that flows through all natural phenomena and connects heaven, earth, and humanity in dynamic relationships. This conceptual framework allows for interpretations that are simultaneously naturalistic and spiritual, treating comets as natural phenomena that operate according to cosmic principles while maintaining their significance as indicators of moral and political conditions. A comet's appearance might result from natural processes involving the interaction of celestial qi with earthly influences, but its timing and characteristics still carry meaning for human observers capable of reading cosmic signs. The technical aspects of Liu Xin's work involves sophisticated mathematical calculations that determine the comet's precise position, track its movement against the stellar background, and predict its future visibility. Chinese astronomy had developed advanced techniques for coordinate measurement, timekeeping, and calendar calculation that enabled precise documentation of celestial phenomena for comparison with historical records. The social and political implications of accurate astronomical interpretation make Liu Xin's work a matter of national importance. Successful predictions enhance the dynasty's legitimacy by demonstrating its harmony with cosmic forces, while failed interpretations might be seen as evidence of imperial decline or loss of heavenly approval. The grand astrologer's reputation and the dynasty's stability are thus intimately connected through the accuracy of his celestial analyzes the Chinese approach to cometary observation also reflects their broader understanding of historical cycles and temporal patterns that govern the rise and fall of dynasties. Comets are seen not as isolated events, but as components of longer historical rhythms that connect astronomical phenomena with political change across generations and centuries. The current comet's significance must be evaluated within this broader historical context, requiring Liu Xin to consult extensive records of previous cometary appearances and their correlation with dynastic events. The Han historical archives contain detailed accounts of comets observed during previous reigns, along with analysis of their political and social consequences that provide precedents for contemporary interpretation. The emperor's personal interest in the comets meaning adds additional complexity to Liu Xin's analytical task. The ruler's character, policies, and recent actions must all be considered when determining how celestial phenomena might relate to imperial governance. A comet appearing during the reign of a virtuous emperor might have entirely different implications than one occurring under a corrupt or incompetent ruler. The collaborative nature of Chinese astronomical work involves dozens of trained observers, calculators, and interpreters who contribute to the comprehensive analysis of celestial phenomena. Junior astronomers conduct routine observations, scribes maintain detailed records, and senior scholars provide theoretical frameworks for understanding complex astronomical relationships. This institutional approach to astronomy creates systems of quality control and peer review that enhance the accuracy and reliability of celestial interpretations. Multiple observers verify important sightings. Calculations are checked by independent mathematicians, and interpretations are debated by scholarly committees before being presented to imperial authorities. The comet that now graces Chinese skies will eventually be recognized by modern astronomers as part of the same periodic cycle that includes Halley's Comet. But for Liu Xin and his colleagues, it represents a unique cosmic event requiring careful analysis within the specific cultural and political context of Han Dynasty civilization. As Liu Xin prepares his final report on the comet's significance, he draws upon centuries of accumulated wisdom while addressing the immediate concerns of his imperial patron. His interpretation will influence policy decisions that affect millions of people, shape the dynasty's response to contemporary challenges, and contribute to the ongoing Chinese effort to understand the mysterious connections between heavenly phenomena and earthly governance. In his careful observations and thoughtful analyses, we see another facet of humanity's ancient quest to find meaning in the cosmic drama that unfolds above our heads each night. From the imperial courts of ancient China, let us now journey westward through time and space to find ourselves in the golden age of Islamic civilization. That remarkable period when scholars from Baghdad to Cordoba preserved, translated, and expanded upon the astronomical knowledge of the ancient world while making revolutionary discoveries of their own. The year is 900 CE, and we stand in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, that magnificent center of learning where the accumulated knowledge of Greek, Persian, Indian, and Arab traditions converges in a synthesis that will reshape human understanding. The cosmos, the library's vaulted halls, cooled by ingenious systems of underground channels that bring relief from the desert heat, contain the largest collection of astronomical texts in the known world. Here, carefully preserved on parchment and paper, lie the translated works of Ptolemy and Aristotle, the mathematical innovations of Indian astronomers, the observational records of Persian court astrologers, and the original contributions of Islamic scholars who have pushed the boundaries of astronomical knowledge far beyond what any previous civilization had achieved. Abu Abdallah al-Battani, known to later Latin scholars as Albatenius, represents the pinnacle of Islamic astronomical achievement during this extraordinary period of intellectual flourishing. His careful observations from the observatory at Raqqa, his mathematical innovations that correct errors in Ptolemy's ancient calculations, and his theoretical insights that will influence astronomers for centuries to come, all combine to make him one of the most important scientists of the medieval period. Al-Battani's approach to comets reflects the unique character of Islamic astronomy, which combined rigorous mathematical analysis with careful empirical observation, while maintaining respect for the divine wisdom that governs all natural phenomena. Unlike his Babylonian and Chinese predecessors, who interpreted comets primarily through cultural and political frameworks, Al-Battani seeks to understand these celestial visitors through systematic study of their physical characteristics and mathematical behavior. The current comet, which has been visible for 6 weeks and shows no signs of fading, presents Al-Battani with an unprecedented opportunity to test the observational techniques and theoretical frameworks he has developed through years of careful study. His measurements of the comet's position, brightness, and apparent motion will be compared with ancient records to determine whether this celestial visitor might be a return of comets observed in previous centuries. The Islamic tradition of astronomical observation had inherited and synthesized the best techniques from multiple ancient traditions while adding significant innovations of their own. Arabic numerals and advanced mathematical methods allowed for calculations of unprecedented precision. Improved instruments, including sophisticated astrolabes and armillary spheres, enabled more accurate measurements of celestial positions. Most importantly, the Islamic emphasis on empirical verification encouraged astronomers to test theoretical predictions against careful observations. Al-Battani's daily routine begins before dawn in the observatory he has constructed on the flat roof of his residence, a space carefully designed to provide unobstructed views of the entire sky, while protecting delicate instruments from wind and moisture. The current comet, positioned now in the constellation the Arabs call the Eagle, provides an excellent subject for the kind of precise positional measurements that characterize Islamic astronomical work. The process of observation requires not only technical skill but also deep familiarity with the complex mathematical techniques that Islamic astronomers have developed for analyzing celestial phenomena. Al-Battani's calculations involve sophisticated trigonometric methods that allow him to determine the comet's distance from Earth, its apparent speed of motion, and its likely orbital characteristics, based on careful tracking of its position over time. The theoretical framework within which Al-Battani conducts his observations reflects the unique synthesis of Greek natural philosophy, Islamic theology, and empirical investigation that characterizes the best Islamic science. He sees comets as natural phenomena operating according to divine law, but law that can be understood through human reason and mathematical analysis rather than merely accepted through faith or tradition. This approach allows Al-Battani to maintain both scientific objectivity and religious devotion, treating comets as components of God's creation that reveal divine wisdom. Through their orderly behavior and mathematical relationships, the same God who created the laws of geometry and arithmetic also governs the movements of comets, making mathematical analysis a form of religious contemplation that brings the observer closer to understanding divine wisdom. The House of Wisdom provides Al-Battani with resources that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations of astronomers. The library contains translations of works from across the known world, allowing him to compare his observations with accounts of comets recorded by Babylonian astronomers, Chinese court officials, Greek natural philosophers, and Persian astrologers. This comparative approach enables pattern recognition and theoretical synthesis impossible for scholars working within single cultural traditions. The collaborative nature of Islamic scientific work also enhances the quality and reliability of Al-Battani's observations. He corresponds with astronomers in Cairo, Cordoba, Samarkand, and other major Islamic centers, sharing data and comparing observations to verify important discoveries. When a comet appears, astronomers across the Islamic world simultaneously track its movement, providing multiple independent measurements that can be combined to create comprehensive analyses. The mathematical techniques that al-Battani applies to cometary observations represent significant advances over the methods available to ancient astronomers. Islamic mathematicians had developed sophisticated algebraic methods, improved trigonometric calculations, and advanced geometric techniques that enabled precise analysis of complex celestial phenomena. These mathematical tools allow Islamic astronomers to detect subtle patterns and relationships that had been invisible to their predecessors. Al-Battani's work on the current comet involves not just observation and calculation, but also careful comparison with historical records to determine whether this celestial visitor might be a periodic phenomenon. His analysis of ancient Chinese and Babylonian records, translated into Arabic by earlier Islamic scholars, reveals intriguing correlations between the current comet's characteristics and descriptions of similar apparitions recorded at regular intervals throughout history. This comparative historical analysis represents one of the most sophisticated attempts yet made to understand comets through systematic study of their long-term behavior. By combining careful observation of contemporary phenomena with mathematical analysis of historical patterns, al-Battani approaches the kind of scientific methodology that will eventually enable Edmund Halley to recognize the periodic nature of cometary orbits. The Islamic approach to comets also reflects broader philosophical commitments that distinguish it from both ancient and medieval Christian approaches to astronomical phenomena. Islamic natural philosophy emphasizes the rationality and consistency of divine law, suggesting that God's creation operates according to comprehensible principles that reward careful investigation. This philosophical framework encourages empirical research while maintaining respect for divine sovereignty. The social and political context of Islamic astronomical work provides additional support for careful cometary observation. Islamic rulers, unlike their medieval Christian counterparts, generally encourage scientific investigation as a way of demonstrating the sophistication and divine favor of Islamic civilization. The Abbasid caliphs, who patronize the House of Wisdom, see astronomical achievement as enhancing their prestige and legitimacy. This political support enables Islamic astronomers to pursue long-term research projects that require sustained effort and significant resources. Al-Battani's cometary observations benefit from institutional stability, access to expensive instruments, and freedom from the kind of theological interference that sometimes hampered astronomical work in other cultures. Technical aspects of al-Battani's cometary observations involve sophisticated procedures for measuring celestial positions, tracking apparent motion, and calculating orbital characteristics. His instruments, though lacking the precision of modern equipment, represent significant improvements over the tools available to ancient astronomers. More importantly, his mathematical methods enable him to extract maximum information from the observations he is able to make. The precision of Islamic astronomical calculations often exceeded the accuracy of the instruments used to make observations, demonstrating the power of mathematical analysis to reveal patterns and relationships that might not be immediately apparent from raw data. Al-Battani's work on comets exemplifies this approach, using mathematical techniques to identify subtle correlations and trends that provide insight into the physical nature of cometary phenomena. The cultural context of Islamic civilization also influences how al-Battani interprets his cometary observations. While he approaches comets primarily as natural phenomena subject to mathematical analysis, he remains aware of their traditional associations with political and social change. His reports to the Abbasid court must balance scientific objectivity with sensitivity to the political implications of astronomical interpretations. The Islamic tradition of astronomical education ensures that al-Batani's methods and discoveries will be preserved and transmitted to future generations of scholars. The madrasas that provide advanced education in mathematics and astronomy train students in the observational techniques and theoretical frameworks that characterize Islamic scientific work. This institutional framework creates continuity and cumulative progress that enhances the development of astronomical knowledge. Al-Batani's work on comets contributes to a broader Islamic project of understanding the natural world through systematic investigation, guided by mathematical principles. His careful observations and theoretical innovations add to the growing body of astronomical knowledge that will eventually be transmitted to medieval Europe through translation and scholarly exchange. The comet that al-Batani observes from his Baghdad observatory is the same celestial visitor that terrified medieval European peasants and vindicated Enlightenment mathematical predictions. But his approach to understanding this phenomenon represents yet another distinctive cultural response to the challenge of interpreting celestial mysteries, one that combines empirical rigor with mathematical sophistication in ways that anticipate the scientific revolution that will transform European understanding centuries later. As al-Batani completes his nightly observations and returns to his study to perform the calculations that will reveal the comet's orbital characteristics, he participates in humanity's ongoing effort to understand the cosmos through systematic investigation. His work bridges the gap between ancient astronomical traditions and the mathematical methods that will eventually enable modern science, demonstrating how knowledge accumulates across cultures and centuries. Through the dedicated efforts of scholars committed to understanding the mysteries of the natural world, the precise measurements in mathematical analyses that fill al-Batani's notebooks will survive the political upheavals that eventually destroy the Abbasid Caliphate, preserved in libraries across the Islamic world, and eventually transmitted to European scholars who will build upon Islamic astronomical achievements. In his patient observations of a single comet, we can trace the continuous thread of human curiosity and systematic investigation that connects ancient stargazers with modern astrophysicists in the eternal quest to understand our place in the cosmic order. Let us now return to medieval Europe, but shift our perspective from the humble peasant cottage and learned monastery to the grand stone halls of a noble castle, where political power and aristocratic privilege create their own unique relationship with celestial phenomena. The year is 1456, and we find ourselves within the walls of Chateau de Vincennes, that magnificent fortress outside Paris, where Duke Philip the Good of Burgundy holds court in splendor that reflects both his worldly power and his acute awareness of how quickly such power might be swept away by the cosmic forces that govern all human affairs. The Duke's private chamber, its walls hung with tapestries depicting scenes of courtly romance and heroic battle, provides a setting that embodies the contradictions of noble life in an age when earthly magnificence exists in constant tension with supernatural uncertainty. Golden chalices gleam on polished oak tables. Illuminated manuscripts lie open to reveal their jewel-bright miniatures, and costly furs provide warmth against the eternal chill that seems to seep through even the thickest castle walls. Yet all this luxury cannot shield Duke Philip from the anxiety that gnaws at him as he contemplates the fiery comet that has dominated the night sky for the past month. Duke Philip represents a generation of European nobility that finds itself caught between the declining certainties of medieval feudalism and the emerging complexities of Renaissance politics. His wealth and power derive from ancient traditions of land ownership and military service, but his survival depends on navigating an increasingly sophisticated world of diplomatic intrigue, commercial innovation, and technological change. The comet's appearance adds yet another layer of uncertainty to an already precarious existence. The Duke's morning routine begins with attendance at private mass in the castle chapel, where the family chaplain, Father Henry, struggles to provide theological comfort in the face of cosmic mystery. The familiar Latin prayers offer some solace, their ancient rhythms providing a sense of continuity with past generations who also faced celestial uncertainty. But even these sacred words cannot entirely dispel the anxiety that has plagued the Duke since the comet first appeared. Hanging like a sword above his carefully constructed world of privilege and responsibility, the political implications of the comet's appearance extend far beyond personal spiritual concerns. Duke Philip's position depends on maintaining delicate relationships with the French king, the Holy Roman Emperor, the English crown, and various Italian city-states, all of whom are watching carefully to see how cosmic omens might affect the balance of European power. A comet that signals divine displeasure with existing political arrangements could trigger shifts in alliance, changes in succession, or outright military conflict. The Duke's council chamber, where he meets daily with advisors to discuss matters of state, has been transformed by the comet's presence into something resembling a permanent crisis management center. Military commanders want to know whether celestial conditions favor offensive or defensive strategies. Diplomatic representatives seek guidance about whether treaty negotiations should proceed or be postponed until cosmic conditions become more favorable. Treasury officials wonder whether the comet signals economic disruption that might require changes in taxation or expenditure. Lord Marshal Guillaume, whose scarred hands and weathered face testified to decades of military service, argues that the comet's appearance demands immediate preparation for war. His experience suggests that such celestial phenomena typically coincide with political upheaval, foreign invasion, or internal rebellion, all of which require military readiness. The Duchess' strategic position between France and the Holy Roman Empire makes it particularly vulnerable to conflicts that might be triggered by cosmic instability. Chancellor Robert, whose legal training and diplomatic experience provide different perspectives on the comet's significance, counsels patience and careful observation. He notes that hasty responses to celestial omens have historically caused more problems than they solved, turning minor difficulties into major crises through overreaction to ambiguous signs. His extensive correspondence with courts across Europe suggests that other rulers are similarly uncertain about how to respond to the comet's appearance. The Duchess, Lady Isabella, whose own noble heritage and political acumen make her a valued advisor, despite the formal limitations placed on women's roles in medieval politics, brings yet another perspective to these discussions. Her networks of family relationships, religious connections, and informal court alliances provide intelligence that complements the official diplomatic channels available to her husband. She has heard disturbing rumors of popular unrest in neighboring territories, of peasant movements that claim divine authorization for rebellion against established authority. The comet has also affected the delicate social dynamics within the ducal court itself. Noble families whose loyalty to Duke Philip depends partly on their confidence in his continued power now watch carefully for signs that cosmic displeasure might signal his approaching downfall. Ambitious courtiers consider whether the comet creates opportunities for advancement through new alliances or whether it counsels caution and consolidation of existing positions. The economic implications of cosmic uncertainty create additional complications for ducal governance. Merchants who normally provide credit for large purchases now demand immediate payment. Uncertain whether political stability will survive whatever catastrophe the comet might herald, Agricultural planning becomes more difficult when farmers hoard grain rather than bringing surplus crops to market. The delicate networks of trade and credit that sustained medieval commerce began to contract under the pressure of universal anxiety. Duke Philip's relationship with the church adds another dimension to his cosmic concerns. As a major patron of religious institutions, he must balance respect for clerical authority with the practical necessities of secular governance. The comet's theological significance remains hotly debated among church scholars, leaving the Duke without clear religious guidance about appropriate responses to celestial phenomena. The Duke's personal faith, shaped by years of conventional religious practice and influenced by the political necessities of medieval rulership, provides some comfort but little practical guidance. He has commissioned special prayers and increased his charitable donations, hoping these pious acts might avert whatever disaster the comet foretells. But such spiritual remedies seem inadequate when faced with the magnitude of cosmic forces that dwarf all human institutions. The castle's daily routines have been subtly altered by the pervasive anxiety that accompanies the comet's presence. Servants work with nervous efficiency, as if afraid that prolonged tasks might be interrupted by catastrophic events. Guards scan the horizons with unusual vigilance, looking for signs of approaching armies or other earthly manifestations of celestial warnings. Even the hunting expeditions that normally provide recreation and practical food procurement are conducted with heightened caution. The Duke's library, containing manuscripts that represent centuries of accumulated wisdom about governance, warfare, and diplomacy, offers little guidance for dealing with cosmic uncertainty. Ancient texts on statecraft assume stable political conditions that seem threatened by supernatural intervention. Military treatises focus on conventional enemies rather than divine judgment. Even the astrological works that attempt to correlate celestial phenomena with earthly events provide contradictory interpretations that offer no clear guidance for action. The correspondence that flows constantly between Chateau de Vincennes and other European courts reflects the universal preoccupation with the comet's significance. Letters from fellow nobles describe similar anxiety and uncertainty, creating a network of shared concern that transcends normal political boundaries. Even traditional enemies seem willing to postpone their conflicts while cosmic conditions remain so unsettled. Duke Philip's children, whose futures depend on the continued stability of ducal power, represent another source of anxiety in these uncertain times. The comet's appearance coincides with delicate negotiations about their marriages, alliances that could determine the duchy's political future for generations to come. Should such important decisions be delayed until celestial conditions clarify, or do cosmic omens demand accelerated planning to prepare for approaching changes? The Duke's awareness of his own mortality, normally kept at bay through the distractions of daily governance and the assumption of dynastic continuity, comes more acute under the comet's ominous glow. Medieval life expectancy means that Duke Philip has already outlived many of his contemporaries, and the comet's appearance raises questions about whether he will survive to see whatever its consequences it might bring. The physical presence of the comet, visible even through the narrow windows of the Duke's private chamber, serves as a constant reminder of forces beyond human control. No amount of wealth, political power, or military strength can affect its movement or alter its message. In its cold light, the magnificent trappings of noble life appear fragile and temporary, dependent on cosmic approval that can be withdrawn without warning or appeal. As Duke Philip prepares for another sleepless night of contemplating his dynasty's future under the comet's watchful eye, he embodies the peculiar vulnerability of those who possess great worldly power but remain subject to supernatural forces they can neither understand nor influence. His carefully constructed world of political alliance, economic control, and social privilege exists at the mercy of cosmic phenomena that care nothing for human ambition or achievement. From the noble's castle, Let us now descend into the bustling commercial districts of Venice, that magnificent maritime republic where merchant princes have built an empire based on trade, calculation, and the careful management of risk. The year remains 1456, and the same comet that troubles Duke Philip's sleep also casts its ominous light over the counting houses and warehouses where Venetian merchants conduct the complex financial operations that connect Europe with the exotic markets of Asia and Africa. Master Giovanni Contarini, whose family has engaged in international commerce for generations, sits in his elaborately decorated office overlooking the Grand Canal, surrounded by ledgers, maps, and correspondence that document trading relationships spanning from London to Constantinople, from Alexandria to Bruges, the Persian carpets beneath his feet, the Chinese silk hangings on his walls, and the African ivory ornaments on his desk testify to the global reach of Venetian commerce. But tonight, his attention focuses not on exotic profits, but on the celestial visitor that threatens to disrupt the delicate networks of credit and trust upon which his empire depends. The merchant's approach to the comet differs markedly from both the peasant's terror and the noble's political anxiety. Master Contarini has built his fortune through careful calculation of risk and reward, through the systematic analysis of probability and the methodical diversification of investment. His response to cosmic uncertainty reflects the same rationale, analytical mindset that has made Venice the commercial center of the Mediterranean world. But even his sophisticated understanding of markets and mathematics provides little comfort when confronted with supernatural forces that operate outside all known categories of risk assessment. The comet's appearance coincides with the most critical period in the Venetian trading calendar, when ships laden with precious cargo are departing for distant ports and massive financial commitments are being made for the following year's commercial ventures. The timing could hardly be worse for a phenomenon that traditionally signals catastrophic disruption of normal economic activity. Master Contarini's carefully laid plans for expansion into new markets now seem dangerously exposed to cosmic intervention that could render all human calculation meaningless. The Venetian approach to commerce had evolved sophisticated methods for managing the uncertainties inherent in long-distance trade, but these techniques assume that risks can be calculated, diversified, and insured against through human agency. Storms can be weathered, pirates can be fought, political instability can be navigated through diplomatic flexibility, but comets represent a category of threat that transcends all normal risk management strategies. How can one ensure against divine judgment or calculate the probability of supernatural intervention? Master Contarini's morning routine begins with consultation of his account books, those meticulous records that track the flow of capital through dozens of simultaneous ventures across the known world. But today, these familiar columns of figures seem to mock his confidence in numerical precision, their careful calculations appearing suddenly fragile when measured against cosmic forces that operate according to divine rather than mathematical logic. The Rialto, that great commercial heart of Venice where merchants gather daily to negotiate deals, exchange information, and assess market conditions, has been transformed by the comet's presence into something resembling a continuous crisis conference. Traders who normally focus on profit margins and shipping schedules now spend their time speculating about the comet's implications for international commerce, sharing rumors about ports that have closed in fear, roads that have become impassable due to panicked populations, and trading partners who have suspended operations pending clarification of cosmic intentions. The comet has already begun to affect the intricate web of credit and debt that sustains Venetian commerce. Bankers who normally extend loans based on careful assessment of commercial prospects now demand additional collateral or higher interest rates to compensate for supernatural uncertainty. Customers who would ordinarily purchase goods on extended payment terms now insist on immediate delivery or request contract modifications that account for possible divine intervention. Master Cantarini's correspondence with trading partners across Europe reveals the universal impact of cosmic anxiety on commercial activity. A letter from his agent in Constantinople describes how Ottoman officials have imposed new restrictions on foreign merchants. Interpreting the comet as a possible prelude to Christian crusade, his representative in Alexandria reports that Muslim traders are hoarding goods rather than shipping them to European markets, fearing that the celestial omen signals approaching conflict between Islamic and Christian civilizations. The psychological impact of cosmic uncertainty proves as disruptive to commerce as any practical obstacles it might create. Merchants who have built their careers on confidence in their ability to predict and control market conditions now face a phenomenon that renders all human calculation suspect. The comet serves as a humbling reminder that even the most sophisticated commercial empires remain subject to forces beyond human comprehension or influence. Master Cantarini's family history includes accounts of previous comets and their effects on Venetian commerce, providing some historical perspective on current anxieties, but little practical guidance for action. His grandfather's memoirs describe the commercial disruption that accompanied the Great Comet of 1378, when international trade virtually ceased for months as merchants waited to see what catastrophes would follow. The family's wealth survived that crisis, but only through conservative strategies that sacrificed potential profits for security. The technical aspects of medieval commerce make cosmic uncertainty particularly problematic for international traders. Communication with distant agents requires weeks or months, making it impossible to coordinate rapid responses to changing conditions. Ships already at sea cannot be recalled if cosmic omens suggest that their destinations have become dangerous. Goods purchased months in advance cannot be easily resold if celestial warnings indicate approaching market disruption. The comet's impact on Venice extends beyond individual merchant concerns to affect the entire commercial infrastructure that supports the city's prosperity. The arsenal, where the state's war galleys are built and maintained, faces difficult decisions about whether to accelerate naval construction in preparation for possible conflicts or to reduce expenditure in case cosmic disasters undermine the tax revenues that finance military spending. The Venetian government, dominated by merchant families who understand both the possibilities and limitations of human calculation, struggles to formulate appropriate policy responses to supernatural uncertainty. Should trade regulations be modified to account for cosmic instability? Should diplomatic relations be restructured to address possible divine displeasure with existing international arrangements? Should public resources be redirected from commercial development to religious observance? Master Cantarini's personal faith, shaped by generations of merchant pragmatism, but still grounded in conventional Catholic teaching, provides some comfort but little practical guidance for commercial decision-making. He has increased his charitable donations and commissioned special prayers for the success of his ventures, but these spiritual investments seem inadequate when measured against the magnitude of cosmic forces that might render all earthly enterprise meaningless. The social dynamics of Venetian merchant society have been subtly altered by the comet's presence. Families who compete fiercely for commercial advantage in normal times now find themselves united by common anxiety about supernatural threats that affect everyone equally. The elaborate social hierarchies based on wealth and commercial success seem less significant when confronted with cosmic forces that care nothing for human achievement. The comet's appearance has also affected the delicate relationships between Venice and its commercial rivals, particularly Genoa, whose merchant families compete with their Venetian counterparts for control of Mediterranean trade routes. Should cosmic uncertainty lead to increased cooperation against common supernatural threats, Or does it create opportunities for aggressive competitors to exploit their rivals' hesitation and anxiety? Master Cantariani's children, who are being trained to eventually take over the family's commercial empire, represent another source of concern in these uncertain times. Should their education be modified to prepare them for a world that might be fundamentally transformed by cosmic intervention? Should marriage alliances and business partnerships be postponed until celestial conditions clarify? Or do supernatural omens make such long-term planning even more urgent? The physical presence of the comet, visible from the windows of Master Cantariani's canal-side palazzo, serves as a constant reminder of the limitations of human agency in the face of cosmic forces, the same celestial visitor that illuminates his commercial charts and account books also mocks his confidence in numerical precision and rational planning, suggesting that even the most sophisticated human enterprises remain subject to divine judgment that operates according to principles beyond human understanding. The Royal Library, containing manuscripts that document centuries of French royal history and provide precedents for dealing with various political crises, offers no guidance for responding to cosmic uncertainty that transcends all human experience. The chronicles of previous reigns describe earthly challenges that could be addressed through military action, diplomatic negotiation, or administrative reform, but they provide no models for dealing with supernatural threats that operate entirely outside the sphere of human agency. The elaborate court ceremonies that normally reinforce royal authority through ritualized displays of majesty now seem somehow hollow when performed beneath the comet's watchful eye. The same rituals that transform an ordinary human being into the sacred person of the king appear as mere theater when measured against cosmic forces that care nothing for human pretension or earthly hierarchy. The comet's persistent presence in the night sky serves as a nightly reminder that even the most powerful earthly ruler remains subject to forces beyond his control or comprehension. As King Louis prepares for another sleepless night of contemplating his kingdom's future under celestial judgment, he embodies the ultimate irony of medieval monarchy, that absolute power over human affairs provides no protection against divine authority that operates according to principles entirely beyond earthly understanding. In his magnificent isolation, surrounded by the golden trappings of royal power, but humbled by cosmic forces that dwarf all human achievement, King Louis represents the final stage in our journey through medieval responses to cometary phenomena, from the terrified peasant to the learned monk, from the anxious merchant to the troubled noble, and finally to the humbled king. We have seen how celestial visitors could reduce all human pretension to its proper proportions, reminding even the most powerful that they remain subject to mysteries that transcend all earthly authority and understanding. The comet that shines above the royal palace is the same celestial visitor that has appeared throughout human history, inspiring fear in ancient Babylonians, reverence in Chinese astronomers, systematic study in Islamic scholars, and eventually mathematical prediction in Enlightenment scientists. But for King Louis and his medieval contemporaries, it remains what it had always been for most of human history, a humbling reminder of cosmic forces that operate according to divine logic rather than human reason, rendering all earthly power and wisdom as temporary and fragile as shadows cast by candlelight. From the commercial palaces of Venice, let us now make our way northward to the greatest seat of earthly power in medieval Europe, the court of Louis XI of France at the Château de Plessis-les-Tours, where the most absolute monarch of his age grapples with the humbling realization that even royal authority provides no protection against cosmic forces that dwarf all human pretension. The year is still 1456, and the same comet that has terrorized peasants, puzzled scholars, disrupted commerce, troubled nobles, now casts its ominous light over the gilded halls where kings claim to rule by divine right. King Louis, known to history as the Spider King for his intricate webs of political intrigue and diplomatic manipulation, sits in his private audience chamber, surrounded by the magnificent trappings of royal power that seemed suddenly fragile beneath the comet's unwavering gaze. Golden tapestries depicting the triumphs of previous French kings hang from walls built of stone, quarried from distant mountains and transported at enormous expense to create this monument to dynastic permanence. Yet tonight, these symbols of earthly majesty appear as temporary as morning mist when measured against celestial forces that care nothing for human hierarchy or achievement. The king's morning routine, normally a carefully orchestrated display of royal ritual designed to reinforce his divine authority, has been disrupted by the cosmic uncertainty that accompanies the comet's presence. Courtiers who would typically compete for the privilege of attending the royal lever now approach these ceremonies with nervous deference, as if afraid that too much familiarity with a monarch who might have lost divine favor could prove dangerous to their own prospects for survival. The complex etiquette that governs every aspect of court life, those elaborate protocols that transform simple human activities into sacred rituals of royal worship, seem somehow inadequate when confronted with evidence of cosmic forces that operate entirely outside the sphere of human control. The same king who can order the execution of rebellious nobles with a gesture finds himself powerless to influence the movement of a celestial visitor that follows its own mysterious trajectory through the heavens. King Louis's political genius, which has enabled him to outmaneuver the most sophisticated opponents through careful manipulation of human weakness and ambition, proves useless when applied to supernatural phenomena that respond to neither bribery nor threats, neither diplomatic flattery nor military intimidation. The comet represents a category of power that transcends all earthly authority, rendering royal prerogative meaningless in the face of cosmic judgment that recognizes no human hierarchy. The royal council chamber, where the king normally meets with his most trusted advisors to discuss matters of state policy, has been transformed into something resembling a theological seminary as courtiers struggle to interpret the comet's significance for the realm's future. Cardinals and bishops who serve as royal counselors find themselves in the uncomfortable position of providing spiritual guidance about phenomena that exceed their own understanding, while secular advisors trained in law and diplomacy search desperately for precedents that might suggest appropriate responses to supernatural threats. Chancellor Guillaume, whose legal expertise normally provides clear guidance about royal prerogative and administrative procedure, admits his complete bewilderment when confronted with cosmic phenomena that operate outside all known categories of jurisprudence. How can earthly law address divine judgment? What legal precedents govern royal responses to celestial warnings? The sophisticated machinery of medieval government, with its elaborate hierarchies and carefully defined procedures, seems utterly inadequate for dealing with supernatural challenges that transcend all human institutions. Marshal de Biazy, whose military experience encompasses every form of earthly warfare, from siege tactics to diplomatic negotiation, acknowledges his helplessness when faced with cosmic forces that cannot be fought, bribed, or negotiated with. His extensive knowledge of fortification, strategy, and logistics provides no guidance for defending against divine intervention that might manifest through plague, famine, natural disaster, or the collapse of social order itself. The royal treasury, that carefully guarded accumulation of wealth that enables the king to maintain his armies, reward his supporters, and intimidate his enemies, appears suddenly fragile when measured against cosmic forces that could render all earthly riches meaningless. Should royal resources be redirected from military spending to religious observance? Should the king's vast wealth be distributed as charity to avert divine displeasure, or hoarded against approaching catastrophe? King Louis's relationship with the church adds another dimension of complexity to his cosmic concerns. As the most Christian king, he claims divine authorization for his authority. But the comet's appearance raises uncomfortable questions about whether his reign still enjoys heavenly approval. The elaborate ceremonies that sanctify royal power through religious ritual now seem to mock his pretensions, suggesting that divine favor might be as temporary and conditional as earthly political alliance. The king's personal faith, shaped by decades of political calculation and influenced by the practical necessities of maintaining royal authority, provides little comfort when confronted with evidence of cosmic forces that operate according to divine logic rather than human reason. His magnificent private chapel, with its jeweled altar furnishings and illuminated prayer books copied by the finest monastic scribes, seems inadequate for addressing supernatural phenomena that dwarf all human spiritual achievement. The comet has also affected the delicate balance of power between the French crown and its various rivals, both foreign and domestic. Reports from royal agents across Europe suggest that other monarchs are similarly paralyzed by cosmic uncertainty, creating opportunities for aggressive action, but also increasing the risks associated with any major policy initiative. Should the king exploit his neighbor's confusion, or does the comet warn against all forms of earthly ambition? The royal court, normally a carefully regulated environment where every gesture carries political significance and every word might influence the distribution of royal favor, has been disrupted by the universal anxiety that accompanies cosmic uncertainty. Courtiers who built their careers on their ability to read royal moods and anticipate political changes now find themselves as confused and helpless as the humblest peasants when confronted with supernatural forces that follow no earthly logic. The elaborate intelligence network that King Louis has constructed to monitor his enemies and anticipate their moves provides no useful information about cosmic phenomena that operate entirely outside the sphere of human political calculation. His spies can report on troop movements, diplomatic negotiations, and court gossip, but they cannot penetrate divine counsels or predict supernatural intervention that might render all earthly intelligence worthless. The king's children, whose marriages and political alliances represent crucial elements in his dynastic strategy, present additional concerns in these uncertain times. Should royal succession be modified to account for possible cosmic judgment that might affect the legitimacy of the current dynasty? Should marriage negotiations be accelerated to secure alliances before approaching catastrophe, or postponed until celestial conditions clarify? The physical presence of the comet, visible from the tall windows of the royal apartments, serves as a constant reminder that even the most absolute earthly power remains subject to cosmic forces that recognize no human authority. The same celestial visitor that illuminates the king's throne room also mocks his pretensions to divine partnership, suggesting that royal claims to heavenly authorization might be as temporary and conditional as all other human institutions. King Louis's awareness of his own mortality, normally suppressed through the distractions of political activity and the assumption of dynastic continuity, becomes acute under the comet's ominous presence. Medieval kingship depends partly on the fiction of royal immortality, the assumption that the king's body, natural, might die, but the king's body politic continues forever through his successors. The comet challenges this comfortable assumption, raising questions about whether divine judgment might extend to entire dynasties rather than individual rulers.